Hey guys, Isaac here for Church Audio Life, and today I want to show you how to make your own instrument or guitar cables right from home. So I want to start by thanking John and Lucky Al, who gave comments on my previous video on how I could improve it to make it better to see everything and explain everything well. So I appreciate your input, and I've tried to incorporate as much as I could here. So I mentioned I'm going to show you how I can help you to make guitar cables, which could also be called instrument cables or patch cables. I'm not actually, going to show you how to make the cable itself. I don't have a wire factory. But to be more correct, more geeky, I'm going to teach you how to solder a TS connector onto a already made guitar cable. So this is a great skill to have. I actually find it really fun to solder, even a little bit meditative. I hope you do as well. So to do this, you're going to need a few things. To start with, you're going to need a soldering iron with a narrow tip. Now, this was a gift to me. It was probably bought at a regular kind of hardware store, and it came with a very wide tip. And the method I'm showing you really does require that narrow tip. And so I actually went and I just took, it's probably not recommended at all, and I took a file and I just filed the tip to be narrower. And then I covered it with solder. And my thought was, well, if I wreck it, these replacement tips are really cheap. And it didn't wreck, it works just fine. You can buy really nice soldering irons from kind of geek stores, but this works just fine for me. You need some kind of vise, some way to hold your cables. There's all kinds of little things you can buy to clamp or make your own wooden kind of guides. This is just a regular vise clamp, again from a hardware store. And I've just glued some rubber onto it to try to reduce or prevent scratching or cracking. You need some little wire snips, wire stripper. Needle nose pliers aren't necessarily 100% required, but they can be handy if you need to grab wires if they get hot. This is from an actual Cat 5 termination kit. It is just like a jacket remover, helps you get rid of the rubber jacket on the end. A ruler is good to have, not necessarily something you can do just by estimating, but if you want to really get precise, that's really good to have a ruler. This is the one my wife got from her high school days. Just make it a rule to say no to drugs and alcohol. It's kind of funny. You'll of course need your Neutrik connector, which I'm going to explain more in a second. Mine's already taken apart. It's from an older cable. And you need the wire itself, and then you'll need solder. This is Kester, it's 0.6 millimeter rosin core solder. I really recommend getting something that's rosin core and kind of narrow. It works really well for these kind of applications. So most of this stuff you can buy from any kind of hardware store or easily from Amazon or from avshop.ca or B&H Photo. The cable you can buy sometimes from cable manufacturing companies. We have one in our city called Texcan. And the connectors I recommend are always going to be Neutrik connectors. This is actually, again, taken from an old cable, but they're the old version of what's called the NP2C. And that's the one I recommend, Neutrik NP2C. Now they have a bunch of variants. They have ones where the end screws on a little differently. They have right-angled ones. They have ones that have kill switches on them. But the vast majority of them will work with these exact same principles and the exact same method. And so if you order any of those, you should be just fine. And again, those can be ordered on Amazon, B&H, avshop.ca, any of those kind of places. I'm not affiliated with any of those places. There's also things you can do to make your life easier if you're going to try to solder. Now, one is going to be the layout of your desk. I'm right-handed, so I have my soldering iron on the right. I have my solder on the left. And there's often times where you're going to be trying to solder something and add solder at the same time. So it's good to have your dominant hand with the soldering iron, because you can grab it kind of like a pen like this, and that'll work really well for you. The other tools I use, I put also more close to my right-hand side. Now, I have limitations with my shooting video. I would actually normally have this separated out a little further. Okay, so now let me explain to you the different parts of the Neutrik connector. There is the boot or bushing, goes on the end, something called a chuck. It works as a strain relief. This Neutrik actually calls it a plug finger. I don't know a single person in the world who has ever called it that. Otherwise, I've heard it more called an insert or just the plug itself. And then this is the housing. And that goes around, of course, the end and screws into the bushing or boot. And those are the parts you're going to need. Now, again, all these different types of Neutrik connectors should have those same exact kind of parts. So absolutely, before you do anything else, you want to make sure that you put the boot on the end of the cable. This is incredibly important. Because if you forget to do this step, you'll end up having to take your entire solder apart and put it all back together again. Ask me how I know. I think everybody who soldered cable at one point has forgotten to put the boot on first and did the rest of the solder, and then they went, when they try to attach it together and have to take it all apart and do it all over again. So try to save you that pain, but good chance you'll probably end up doing that. Anyway, the next thing you can do is put the chuck on. Now this has a slit in the middle, so it wouldn't necessarily have to go on right now, but I like to do it just to get it out of my way. And then you'll want to start preparing the cable itself. Now, on the Neutrik website for this type of cable, it talks about you want your wire in the end to be 14 millimeter. So I like to take a bit more than that to start, and I use this jacket remover, and then I just take and I remove sometimes a fair bit more than 14 millimeter. That way I know I have enough, and I can work with it and trim it down to what I need. So this is a pretty simple thing. You can just pinch that on there, and then you start spinning it, but as you're spinning it, make sure it stays in place, otherwise it can start kind of spiralizing down the cable. It doesn't do any good. And this is a very thick rubber jacket, so you need a few repetitions here. If you have a thinner rubber jacket, do less. What you don't want to do is you don't want to cut right into the wires underneath. So I'll stop there, and then you can start bending it a bit, and you can bend fairly hard here. And you want to crack it open without, yeah, I might need to do a few more spins maybe, let's see. There we go. So you see the rubber cracks open, you can see the wire underneath. Then just pull that apart, and sometimes it's a little stiff. There we go. And if you bought correct cable, you should see one wire wrapped in another wire here. That's bare. This is actually your shield, and the wire that's underneath is the positive. What you want to do now is make sure you take all of these strands and get them all separated off entirely. Make sure you don't have any loose ones sticking out. And then from the bottom, start pinching it tightly. And then I usually spin in a clockwise direction, but you can spin anti-clockwise if you really would like. And even though you're not going to use this entire length, I still spin the entire length, just to make sure it's ready to go. And there you have it. So this is again the positive wire and the shield. And so this is going to go onto the tip, this is going to go onto the sleeve. Now for the positive, Neutrik recommends 14 millimeter, and this actually works well. You might as well go with their measurements because they know how their plugs work, and this will help you save you a lot of hassle. And then the shield should be 6 millimeters less. It doesn't specifically say 8 millimeters because I think in case you cut this a little wrong, you still want to be 6 millimeters from that one. And that works out well. So this is where you could use the ruler again. This sometimes has been estimated in the past. So this line would be 15, so 14 would be right there. This isn't rocket surgery. You don't have to be necessarily exactly precise, but the better you are, the better. So there we go. Trim that there. And then the other one we want to be 6 millimeters less, so around 8. Sometimes this is a bit fussy with the ruler, but there we go. Hopefully you can see that there. There we go. So take a look there. That's basically exactly 8. So I just got a quick haircut and change my clothes between takes. So the next thing you want to do is now you need to remove this little black jacket that's around that center, positive wire. My friend Trevor actually told me that what this does is this is actually a conductive plastic, and it actually is used to help the braided shield remove like RF interference and that kind of a thing. And I was completely actually unaware of that, so I was so grateful for his information. I don't want to be out there putting out bad information. So actually I actually reshot the video from this point on just to make sure that I give out the absolute best information possible. Because what can happen is if that's conductive and if it actually touches that center tip, positive connection, it could actually cause that RF problem to become severe, or even a sort of a partial grounding out of the cable. So yeah, we don't want that to happen. So you could even use the wire stripper and use that to get rid of that, but I found it pulls the wire out way too far. So I've opted to use a razor blade instead. And because that rubber underneath is quite thick, you can cut into it a little bit, but of course don't go too far push through it. You don't have to worry about it just slightly scratching that rubber, it's fine. There we go. Of course, be careful not to cut yourself. A little bit tricky with the stuff in the way there. And then that should just peel off. There we go. There we go. And now you have that exposed clear rubber. And now Neutrik recommends taking off 4 millimeters of that outer jacket to expose 4 millimeters of wire. Now, what they're really going after is they want to be able to fill up that center cup for the tip without having too much exposed bare wire. But I actually found, even though that's their own measurement, 4 millimeters, I find that leaves almost a bit more than I would like. So I like to get closer to more like 3 millimeters, and that's actually really hard to do while you're using the wire strippers. So sometimes you get that image in your mind about how big 3 millimeters is, approximately like that size of that cup, and then kind of go from there as you're doing it. So that's what I'm going to do now. So this is 20 gauge wire. I just happen to know that sometimes it's listed on the cable. Otherwise, you can note that most of the time these wires are going to be 20 gauge. Sometimes they're a little thinner if it's like a Mogami wire. Sometimes if you're looking for smaller installs, they'll be 22. There might be the occasional time they're fatter, like 18. But the majority of the time they're going to be 20. So you just literally find the 20 in there, shove it in there, and strip off about 3 millimeters. So I'm going to do that. And you're kind of eyeballing this. And then what I like to do is I like to hold actually onto the wire so it doesn't get, sometimes it pulls a little bit out of the rubber sheath. So I'm just going to pinch there, pull a bit. And I didn't take off quite enough, so I'm going to take off I'm going to try that one more time. There we go. There we go. Now that looks almost perfect to me. Let's check it against the measurement. And that is actually just under that 4 millimeter mark. So that'll probably end up being just perfect. If I even compare it to the cup, not bad actually, pretty good. So the next thing we'll need to do is to tin the wire and to tin the connector. Tinning is essentially kind of preparing the solder in advance. It's filling or coating the wire with solder. But it's important you do these with what's called a hot solder, not a cold solder. Now, a hot solder is when you actually heat up the metal so that the metal itself is what melts the solder. And the reason why that's important is if you have a cold solder, if you just have like gloop solder onto something, you're always going to end up with a really bad connection. That it doesn't bond to the metal properly, it doesn't absorb into the wires properly. I think there's even a chemical reaction that doesn't happen when you just kind of glob solder onto something. So it's really important that you do a hot solder. If you ever see any video that tells you just to kind of glue solder onto something, that's wrong. Just don't follow it. You want to do this properly. So I like to tin the wires first. So I like to put that into the clamp, and of course get it in there. Don't tighten it down too hard. There we go. Another quick tip is that you want to do this fairly quickly. If you leave the soldering iron on the wires too long, it melts the rubber back and you end up with this, it ends up increasing the exposed bare wire, and you don't want to do that. So you want to do this relatively quickly. Another thing too is that the solder itself transfers the heat better than this iron itself, so always make sure there's a little glob of solder on your soldering iron. Now what I like to do, there's a couple different ways you could do this, but the way that works well for me is to put the solder, the little glob of solder, on the bottom of the wire. That'll heat up the wire, and then I touch the solder to the top of it, and make sure that the glob is actually touching. There we go. In that case, it did melt the rubber back a little ways, so we're going to have to trim that wire down a little bit. There we go. Same thing on the shield. And you see how that solder actually kind of sucks in or absorbs into the metal. That's a good thing. So yeah, right away while it's there, I realize that this is going to be a little bit long, so I'm just going to take just the tiniest little bit off this end. There we go. Maybe even a tiny bit more. And then I'm going to take a little bit off the shield to match, and you'll see how that's going to work out just fine later. Okay, take that out of there. Now you want to tin the connector. This was a connector I reused, but I was able to get out most of the solder that was previously in there. And then what I'm going to do in the end is I actually want of course, the positive, the tip is going to go into this one, and I'm going to actually want, in my case, to solder the shield onto the sleeve more to this side, because if I'm right-handed and with my technique, I like to hold the soldering iron underneath to melt the solder. There is other ways, but that works out well. So that's going to be hard to do if there's a wire right there. More chance of me burning it, that kind of a thing. So to tin, you're just going to grab your solder. Again, make sure you got a little blob of solder on the end of it. There we go. And of course, when I do the tip, I'm going to hold that to the bottom to the right, and then keep pushing solder in until it's almost full. There we go. For the shield that I'm attaching to the sleeve, like I said, I want to be more off to this one side. So sometimes what you could do is even turn that a little bit in the clamp. Doesn't always necessary. I'm going to try it without first. A little glob of solder again, hold it down to that side underneath, and push the solder onto there. You see how that works just really well. And you want a decent amount of solder. Don't be cheap here. You don't want so much that it's going to actually start touching other things, but enough that you know it's going to solder well and not give you problems. And now you want to check to see if the measurements of the cable are looking good. So if you just kind of push that up against there, you can kind of see that that's probably going to work out just perfectly. You see how the rubber from the positive goes right to the end, and that thing looks like it's going to fill the cup. And then my sleeve is sitting right nicely in that glob of solder there. So there's a little bit of debate which one you do first. I just find that I like to do the tip or the positive first. Again, make sure that I shall clean off my solder iron. It's good to do that relatively often. And I'm going to put another bit of solder on the end of that again. There we go. And now I'm just going to hold those in place and melt these together. There we go. And you want to get a good solder connection there, and let it fully cool before you do the next one. This is where you might be able to use the needle nose and actually just bend this just slightly over that way. And just using the tension of the cable, you can kind of hold it in place and not have to worry about burning your fingers, etc. And then hold it underneath and then melt it together. There we go. And see how it kind of sucks in there, it sucks together. And so what you want to do is quick visual inspection. Make sure you haven't melted anything that you shouldn't be melted. Everything is touching what it should and not what it shouldn't. If there's an air gap, between the wires, and you can loosen that up. Start spinning that to the side a little bit. There's a gap there. I can see there's a gap there, and yeah, it looks really good to me. So that solder is actually done now, and of course, don't burn your fingers. Sometimes that end gets a bit hot. It shouldn't be too hot if you didn't keep it on. If you didn't keep the solder iron on it too long. And then what you want to do now is take the chuck here, which again acts as a strain relief, and you'll see how it lines up nicely and fits into this kind of groove here. And there's this little extra thing that can be pulled off. So for certain gauges of wire, you actually will want this chuck to be a little shorter, and you actually got to snap this off. So what you do is leave it on first, try it, and if you can't actually screw the boot on, then you know that's what you need to do. So you take the housing, put it on the end there, slide it over, take the boot, bring that into place, and then screw that together. And of course this is I used this previously, so I know this is the right length. And there you have it. That is your completed guitar or instrument connector soldered onto your guitar wire. Now, of course, you got to do the same thing again for the other side. And there is cable testers if you have them, but of course the best test is to actually try it out. Jiggle and wiggle the cable, make sure you're not getting crackles or anything like that. And you should have yourself a good and solid guitar cable. Well, I really hope that helped you. I just really enjoy being able to share the skills I've learned in doing audio, and hopefully it can help you in whatever job you're doing in audio. And if it has, I'm so glad. So thanks for watching, and God bless.